Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Welcome back to yet another episode in a continuing series. This is Talking Books and Writing and Stuff, the podcast, tell your friends. With us today from the North Battleford area in Saskatchewan, just a few miles or kilometers down the road from us in Radisson, Cliff Burns. And Cliff, apparently you've been a professional writer for 35 years. How is that even possible?
I ask myself that every day, Dennis, and all I can say is that, I have a record of futility that is second to none. I like to joke that I'm probably the worst-selling writer since Johannes Gutenberg first started running books off his press, And it's just a sick desire to express myself. I like to quote that the term from who was it? It was Nabokov. He said, "You continue to write even in defiance of all the world's muteness." Well, that's my work in a nutshell. I have a small audience of readers and everything, but I just write just for the. I can't even say it's a joy to write because it's not. It's an absolute horrible ordeal to work, but. There's just, I can't not write. As Robert Penn Warren says, it's the pain I can't live without.
I understand vaguely. So when did this all start? Did you wake up when you were 10 and say, this is what I'm going to do? Or was it a gradual thing? Or how did this all come about?
Well, when I was 10, I think I probably wanted to be Gene Autry. And so that didn't turn out to be possible. And then I wanted to be an astronaut because Neil Armstrong was one of my heroes, but I don't have 20/20 vision and a fear of heights, so that's a bit of a problem with that. So, in many ways, writing was a bit of a booby prize. But I knew from a fairly young age that I was not destined for the world of commerce or business or anything like that. There was just, I loved acting. I'd still like to try to do a little bit more acting, and I loved just being able to express myself. And I had a love of writing that went back to childhood because I had kind of a difficult home life, and so writing was this tremendous escape for me. And so once I discovered the work of Ray Bradbury and people like that, I realized, I wanted to do what they could do, which is could take one little frightened boy out of his home and put him in the stars.
Well, that brings us back to what we were discussing before we went on air, as we used to say in the old days. Your influences, early influences, who would they be? And you can name your 3 favorite books as we do this. So tell us all about what inspired you other than Ray Bradbury, I should say.
Yeah, well, Bradbury was just, he was like my on-ramp into science fiction, fantasy, and horror. But 2 of my biggest influences were Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont, and they were 2 of the 3 people, along with Rod Serling, that were responsible for The Twilight Zone. And the moment I saw The Twilight Zone, I realized that I had found my place to be. And those 2 guys, Bradbury or Beaumont and Matheson, wrote all the best Twilight Zone stories, all the ones that you'd remember from the original series. And they just showed me how you could take reality and just bend it slightly. It doesn't have to be a big break, just a slight bend, and you can take your readers, your audience, into a very strange, different place indeed. So they were huge. And then as I got older, I just started, I sort of lost interest in genre fiction and became more of a fan of literary fiction, and that's when I discovered people like Thomas Pynchon and Samuel Beckett and people like that really showed me that there are no limits to language, that imagination is like infinity. It is absolutely limitless. And so they were important people. Nowadays, I think it would be someone like George Saunders is such an incredible writer, particularly his short stories. I think he's the best short story writer in the world, certainly in the English language. Another guy is Jim Shepard. I just absolutely revere him. So, there's a few names your audience can start scribbling down, hopefully, because they're all excellent.
And what do you remember the first time you ever wrote something that someone actually paid you for?
I remember the first, it's funny, the first thing I ever wrote that I ever got any positive feedback was I wrote a poem when I was, I think, 9 years old and my teacher put it in competition at the Bounty Fair, this little agricultural fair in the community next to where we lived in this small rural community in Saskatchewan. And it won first prize. I went to the fair and walked around, and there's my poem, and it's got a blue first prize ribbon on it, and that was an incredible experience. So I can honestly say that I'm an award-winning writer. You always see these people, winner of the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. Well, I can say I won the Bounty Prize Award for Best Poetry of a 9-year-old. I can still remember the last lines. It was, the owl hoots, and then I sleep. After that, the rest of it's gone.
Oh, perfect. That's a great line. I love that.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think it's. I think Elliot right now is sitting up and taking attention wherever he is.
Wonderful. So Cliff Burns is with us, and we were talking earlier about books he liked, and you were mentioning one that we've interviewed. One of our earlier interviews, Carl Malantis, a book called Matterhorn, all about the Vietnam War. What did you like about that book?
Well, as you said, before we were on the air, I said it was one of the 3 books that affected me viscerally and as a reader. And the march through the jungle, the pointless march through the jungle, I'm sure you've read it, but
yep.
This Marine detachment is given this basically an impossible mission because their idiot commander has misread the topography maps and doesn't know that it's impossible landscape to get through. So they have this impossible landscape and an impossible deadline, an impossible mission. And it's just as you're walking through the jungle with them, and you can smell their sweat and the
yes.
fear coming off them because there could be an ambush around every tree. There could be a tripwire anywhere. And I've never experienced that with a war novel. I love war novels. I've read many of them, Naked and the Dead on, and or I guess the Iliad. We'll start with the classic. But that book, Matterhorn, just had an extraordinary effect on me.
I think I remember the sequence you're talking about, page after page of them trekking through the jungle. It's raining. They don't have any food. They don't have any water. It don't sleep for days on end, and then. For nothing. They go to the top of this hill and then take it and then give it up and go back down again. And like, what? So
it's the best metaphor for the Vietnam War you could ever have.
It's the best metaphor for a lot of things, like the corporate world. 30 years on the job, and then they give you the golden handshake, like what happened to my wife after 44 years with a major corporation. Oh, by the way, you're done now. Don't tell anybody, pack up your things and leave. What? Okay.
Yes. What a great way to instill loyalty, huh?
Right. Everything is pointless. We were just on a cruise, a river cruise in Europe on the Rhine River, and we met a guy. He's like my age, early 70s. He joined up in 1968, right out of high school. He was a combat medic in Vietnam. And
Good Lord.
Oh, good Lord. Yeah, and he's still... and then he's got... Parkinson's from the Agent Orange. So, What? Yep, what the heck? So, we could tell even once in a while I'd say something that didn't quite go over too well, and he'd kind of shudder a bit, and his wife would put her arm on his shoulder just to, bring him back down to earth kind of thing. And then to read a book like that, Matterhorn, or even see a movie like Platoon or Full Metal Jacket or Hamburger Hill. I can't even finish watching those anymore after meeting this guy, because it's like same age as me, got out of high school. I didn't have to go to the army or anything like that. A couple miles down the road, because I grew up in White Rock, BC, a couple miles down the road, guys in Blaine, Washington, and Bellingham, off they go, so it's pointless. And there was no point to the whole thing, right? No point at all. No, it was a complete waste of millions of Vietnamese lives and 50,000 Americans, and just an absolute horrific thing. But that's beside the point. What you liked, Knut Hansen? He was a Nobel Prize winner from Norway, I think. Yeah, Knut Hansen wrote this book called Hunger, and it's basically about a man starving to death on the streets of, I guess it would be Oslo.
And as you're reading it, you're just ravenous. I could have just eaten a 3-course meal, and I just read it, and my stomach was just twisting and knots. And then the other book that had the visceral effect was Into Thin Air, Krakauer's book about the doomed Everest expedition. I mean, I had altitude sickness. I had vertigo. It was just, it was these books that can create that are just absolutely, on a whole other level than what I can achieve, and I recognize it, and I just thank the genius involved.
Well, that's the beauty of books like that, especially nonfiction, that can take you right into the heart of the situation, into the heart of darkness, and you can relate to it, but only on your own special level that no one else reading it might be able to understand, but you, as the reader, understand it on your own personal terms, which is, I guess, is the beauty of the whole thing, right?
It's the beauty of that most intimate conversation between writer and reader. It's what really keeps you going on the dark days, is knowing. I mean, I always dream of an ideal reader out there. That's my thought whenever I commit words to paper. I just think somewhere they're out there, and they're a reader without gender, without color. They're just a great reader who loves a literate read that constantly takes them by surprise and doesn't, revert back to formula, which is something that I avoid like a spitting adder.
I would avoid one of those too.
Yes.
So you've been a professional writer. This is Cliff Burns, professional writer for over 35 years. You got 16 full-length books you've put out. Is that right?
Yes, indeed. Yep.
And 100 or more published stories. Now, are they in all sorts of magazines and newspapers and such like that?
Yeah, all over the world. Yeah, I stopped submitting work about 2010. I'm a total self-publisher right now. I'm an independent writer in press, and so I do all that stuff myself. And I got so tired after 20 years or 25 years of submitting work and then waiting a year for a response and getting a 3x5-inch form letter stamped, dear occupant. I got so tired of that that I just swore I would never, ever do it again. And Dennis, it was the one thing that saved my sanity more than anything else, except maybe meeting my wife, was making that decision to no longer go on that stupid treadmill anymore. Writers are better off buying lottery tickets than they are submitting to magazines.
And yes, and then there's fewer and fewer magazines anyway, so then there's lots more and more of self-published or independent authors. So the indie scene is very big. 15 anthologies. Now you have your own imprint, Black Dog Press. Tell us how that came about.
Again, just the sense of futility of dealing with publishers. It just became so impossible. My first novel was called So Dark the Night, and it made the rounds forever. And it's like an occult thriller involving two detectives that only work after dark. They work from dusk till dawn. They're not vampires. They just take on cases that happen at night. And I got so much great feedback on that, and then they'd say, but we decided not to publish it. That was the Canadian ones, and then the American ones, I couldn't even get past the door. And it was just, finally, after waiting a year and a half at this one big American press, I phoned the editor who had been so initially warm to me, and they just said, sorry, don't remember you, and basically hung up the phone, and that was it. That was the last straw. And from then on, I published my first book. Well, actually, I published my first book back in 1990, and then I sort of went into a hiatus a little bit. But after more frustration, I've been a full-time since 2010.
Well, that sounds like a great premise. I mean, that's you could pitch that like an elevator pitch in Hollywood. It's like let's see, Sherlock Holmes and Watson meet some guy. I don't know where I'm going with this, but
I had it cast and everything. Like it's this exotic female detective and sort of this her thug-like companion. And all I could think about was Uma Thurman and Bob Hoskins. And so if you ever read the book, they are who it's intended to be. I just see this tall, willowy, beautiful woman and this short, brutal, thuggish guy who's always at her side and like a loyal dog.
No, and that's great. Anything that happens after dark and like in the nighttime when all the strange things happen and these two people are out there fighting crime as best they can because of their own peculiar proclivities, I would say. So you've got your own press, Black Dog Press. How do we reach Black Dog Press? Do we just go online and Google it or what?
Absolutely, and in the coming months I'm going to be putting up a new landing page. I've bought my own domain name finally, which my oldest son has been warning me to do for ages, and so I finally did. I got my domain name, and I'm going to have that up. It'll be cliffburns.com, and from there you can go to my blog. You can go, I'm going to, like I say, I'll have a podcast up hopefully in a few months, and various venues where you can buy my books if you'd like or whatever, but I mean, the main thing is to get my work out there. To tell you the truth, making money off my work has never been a priority for me at all, and that's something I realize at 60 years old. That maybe have not have been the wisest life choice I've ever made.
Oh, well, who knows? I've had millions of bad life choices. So what the heck? I know all about that. That's crazy, man. So do you have a daily routine, or is it every day different?
No, there's a daily routine. Routine is very important to me. I'm a daily writing. I heard about that from Bradbury when I was first starting out writing, is that the importance of getting words on paper every day. Mm-hmm. And I know numerous professional writers who swear by that. Nowadays, I once put a tweet on that on my Twitter blog or Twitter post, and someone immediately went into a rage calling me an ableist and saying, "Oh, how dare you?" And it's like, really? I mean, are you going to say this to Bradbury? Are you going to say this to what's that gal's name? She's also a brilliant writer, and she says exactly the same thing. I mean, it's just Octavia Butler. She has this 10 rules of writing, and the first one is literally write daily. But I'm somehow an ableist for saying this. It's just so ridiculous. The poisonous atmosphere online is one of the most ridiculous aspects of this society that we're purportedly building.
Well, that's what writers write and podcasters podcast. And my joy in life is talking to writers and getting their word out to the public, no matter how big or small it is. But that's what I do. So, and I know years ago when I was trying to write a book, I had a therapist and I said, I don't know what to do. I can't write. And the guy said, just 15 minutes. If you can write for 15 minutes, try that. 15 minutes a day, and then, see what happens after that. So, if you sit down and say to yourself, okay, I'll write for 15 minutes, well, all of a sudden, before you know it, maybe you've done 2 hours. So, you got to do it every day. Don't tell me that Sidney Crosby doesn't skate every day.
Oh, absolutely.
or, Aaron Judge take batting practice, or Randy Bachman practices the guitar every day. No, don't tell me that. So you got to write if you're going to be a writer. You have to
remember
write.
Malcolm Gladwell's thing. You need 10,000 hours. I think that equates to 4.5 years to get good at something.
Oh, yeah.
Just to get reasonably good,
Reasonably.
And so, if you're not doing it daily, and it's also a physics thing, that old rule that objects in motion tend to remain in motion. Once you get going, you can keep that momentum going. But when you stop and start, it's very, very hard to continue like that. And so it's very important to keep that ball rolling, to keep the momentum going every day. And that's not ableism. That's somebody with 38 years of professional writing behind them telling you that.
What do you do about self-doubt? How do you say to yourself, oh, I can't do this. This award-winning poem is a piece of crap. I mean, how do you keep yourself going after all these years?
I hate to say this, Dennis, but I find that self-loathing is a very good tool in my arsenal. It actually fuels me. I write out of anger and self-loathing, and it's never good enough for me. There's that old saying that great works aren't finished, they're abandoned. And I kind of feel that way. I just keep work on something until I literally can't look at a word of it anymore. and that's when it's ready to go out or whatever. But it's not an easy process. It's an emotionally and psychically draining and torturous process. I never learned to enjoy the process of writing, and that's one of my great regrets after nearly 4 decades now, that it's never been fun for me. I've never taken a moment to say, well, I wouldn't say that. When one of my books comes out and I hold it for about 10 minutes, I go, oh, that's good. And then that voice in the back of my head is saying, what have you done lately? And it just never, ever ends. And I just foresee my death I'll be keeled over my keyboard. They'll have to pry the pen from my fingers, and that'll be how I go.
You'll have to pry the typewriter from my cold, dead hands.
Yes, exactly.
A couple more questions quickly before we wrap things up with Cliff Burns. Suggestions, tips for would-be writers or neophyte writers or those struggling to write? I guess we've probably covered it. Well, you have to write every day. But anything else that you can throw in there that you've sort of learned by fire over the years?
Well, I'm a really terrible person to ask for writing advice because it's such a terrible process for me. So I if it's not a calling for you, I would say don't write. If you can get away with not writing, go on with your life, do something else. And we don't need, frankly, more amateurs and bad writers in it. I feel with all this coming wave of automation and things, people are going to be put out of work, and what are they going to become? Suddenly they'll be artists. Suddenly they'll be writers, and we're going to get this huge wash of terrible writers coming in. But anyway, dropping that aside, I would say, first of all, writers write, as we talked about, and forget about creative writing classes and the workshops. Buy yourself a cheap notebook and a pen, and just write. And don't pester other people with your writing. Dennis, I can't tell you how many times over the years I've gotten a note for someone saying, heard an interview with you, thought I'd attach some of my poetry or my latest collection or whatever. And it's like the solipsism and narcissism behind that is just ridiculous. These people that are writing now, they think that there's some sort of a back door into the exclusive club, some way that they can jump the lineup and get in ahead of everybody else. And 1 or 2 people have asked me, how do I monetize my work? And that just sends me into a rage. So I would say there are no shortcuts. Just get down to work, get better with every single draft, and remember your 10,000 hours dictum, because it's probably accurate.
Probably accurate, more than we think. A couple quick, let's go back to the Twilight Zone for a moment. Do you have a favorite episode that you can remember?
Oh, numerous. and they're always Matheson and Beaumont episodes, too, because Serling's episodes tended to be preachy. He was trying to make these sort of little points about human character, whereas Matheson and Beaumont, they were dark fantasists. They already knew what human nature was all about. So there's an episode called The Howling Man that was based on the Charles Beaumont story, and Beaumont also wrote the teleplay, and it's absolutely superb. And later on in the series, there's an adaptation of a Matheson story called Steel, and it actually stars Lee Marvin in the lead role. And it's set in the future where humans are not allowed to box, but robots can, these sort of humanoid robots. But his robot is broken down and ruined, and he's an old boxer, so he pretends he's a robot to get in the ring. And it's a remarkable episode, and but there are numerous others. They did anyway, that's enough for now.
Yeah, the ones I remember quickly are the ones where this girl is having an operation because she's beautiful and the whole rest of the world is sort of ugly, right? And so the flip of that.
It's Eye of the Beholder. That's
the
episode. I know it.
Yeah, and then Burgess Meredith, when he's the only person left, but he can't read because his glasses are broken.
Time Enough to Last, it's called. I know that one too.
That one too.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So anyway, Cliff, before we leave, quickly again, your books are available at Kindle, Amazon, that kind of thing. Give us a sales pitch.
Absolutely, and they're available in Saskatoon. I like people to use independent bookstores. I don't like them to have the big silly stores, the Amazons or whatever. I wish they'd buy it from McNally Robinson and Turning the Tide. All of my books are at Turning the Tide in Saskatoon. Great little progressive bookstore. Pete Garden, who runs the place, is just a wonderful community member, just a gift to the community. So if you're going to order it, try to get it from your favorite used bookstore, because they're all available. It's just a case of knowing the titles, and they'll find it.
And that's right, and that's Cliff Burns. So Cliff Burns, we'll tell everybody right now to go look for books by Cliff Burns, especially in Saskatoon area at Turning the Tide and McNally Robinson, and of course your favorite online portal. Cliff Burns, thank you very much for your time today, and continued good luck to you and yours.
It's a pleasure, Dennis. Thank you so much.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.